All right, gentlemen, we're here to talk about cultural transformations within religion and science from 1450 to 1750. This is your first portion of chapter 7. When we open, we look at Christians from Africa that are conducting missionary work in Europe and North America, a rather remarkable reversal of what was an earlier pattern. Christianity will become a genuine world religion that connects a lot of different groups of people to one another. The scientific revolution that we will see that takes place will also foster a very different approach to the world too. And the Europeans at this point in time are going to become a very central player in developments. They don't act alone on this, but they are a big part of it. People who convert shape Christianity as well, and science is also met with varying receptions in other regions of the globe. Excuse me. So, um, when we look at this in 1500, Christianity is mostly limited to the area of what was the Iberian Peninsula and the British Isles, and then a little bit of Russia. But for the most part, it's very solidly in those areas. If we look at current events of what takes place, we can see how that would move out to different areas such as the Americas and the Philippines. Um, Also, some places where it's more modestly put out there in places like Siberia, China, Japan. Um, there are some small communities within Egypt and Ethiopia as well, but there are some issues. There's some serious division within Christianity, the Roman Catholic Church versus also the Eastern Orthodox Church, that might change some of the ways in which some of these things are brought about. Um, there is the idea on the defense against Islam, the loss of the Holy Land by 1300. You have the fall of Constantinople that takes place, and then also um, the Ottoman siege on Vienna in 1529 and 16 and in 1683 as well. So all those things kind of change the way we look at Roman Catholicism within that place. Now, Western Christendom is very much fragmented by what is known as something called the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation uh, is a trend that begins, excuse me, in 1517. It starts with Martin Luther, and with Martin Luther posting his uh, 95 theses about allegedly and nailing it to the castle door of the Church of Wittenberg. It's a document that has various abuses of the Roman Catholic Church. And he issues that document, known as the 95 Thesis, apparently on the door. It's not necessarily anything that is new to this point in time, but it is one of the things that really sets off the fragmentation of the church itself. So again, like I said, this isn't necessarily a new thing that we're looking at. Luther's not the first one to kind of go over and criticize the Roman Catholic Church, but his protest is deeply rooted within the grounded in theological difference. Um, he questions a special role of the clerical hierarchy, including the Pope himself. So he'd long been critical of things like the luxurious life that the Pope had lived. He also talks about the selling of indulgences. The selling of indulgences would be able to remove the penalties of sins and other aspects of church life and practice that had existed during this time. What really makes Luther's power or protest potentially revolutionary was its theological basis. He was a troubled man, anxious about his relationship with God, and Luther had recently come to an understanding of kind of salvation, really his saving idea. And he believed it came through faith alone. There are a lot of changes within what was the Catholic Church that said it otherwise. The Catholic Church believes that good works for the sinner um, were also needed in this. And Luther, the source of belief was that if you have faith, you will be saved. And that was his idea behind this. And it's really what got him into some trouble within the Catholic Church. Contrary to any kind of popular belief, Luther's ideas provoke a massive schism within the world of Catholic Christendom. They express a variety of kind of political, economic, and social tension, not just religious differences, but a lot of issues amassed from this. So it's not just one thing that led to this, but Luther's ideas really push forward into some different thoughts, and it creates a schism within the church. And the schism is this rift within the church, or a tear within that time period. Some monarchs will use Luther to kind of justify their independence from the papacy, one of those being Henry VIII of England, who really uses this to really gain legitimacy for his own roles within this. It gave new religious legitimacy to a middle class who felt maybe that they weren't necessarily heard within structure here. And commoners are going to be attracted to the new religious ideas as a tool for protest against the entire social order that existed. So when you look at this, it really changes the way that we push about it. The lower classes and the middle classes now are going to have a voice in religion, as opposed to just bowing to the almighty, powerful Catholic Church at that time. Now, the Catholic Church will go through its own Reformation as well, so that will change some things too. There are very many women who are attracted to Protestantism. With the Reformation teachings and practices, it doesn't necessarily offer a greater substantial role in the church or society. The veneration of Mary and female saints ends, leaving really the male Christ figures the sole object of worship within Protestantism. They are opposite. They have a huge opposition to celibacy and the monastic life, so they closed down convents, which had offered some women an alternative outside of marriage. So you see women's roles reduced there too. They can no longer really go into these convents to be a part of God. And Protestants, with the exception of Quakers, are not any more willing than Catholics to offer women official roles within the church itself. So the importance that Protestants gave to reading the Bible for oneself stimulates the education and literacy for women, but given that emphasis on women as a whole is not necessarily there. So the Protestant Reformation really opens some new space through directions of European intellectual life, but doesn't necessarily give them this highly acclaimed kind of ideal. The Reformation will spread quickly both within and beyond Germany, thanks to the measures of the printing press. Luther's many pamphlets and his translation of the New Testament into German are soon widely available. So the printing press will really, really help push Martin Luther's ideas out there and help the spread greatly. As the Reformation spread, you're going to see a splintering of different things into different groups. So you start to see Protestant churches like Lutheranism become a huge part of this. Calvinist churches, Anglican, Quaker, Anabaptist churches, many of those are going to be kind of split into producing an array of Protestant denominations. And each is very distinctive, but none gave really an allegiance to Rome or to the Pope itself. So when we start looking at how that goes about, you are going to see kind of Rome and the Pope spread throughout these ideals. There is a huge class division that fractures the political system of Europe. So for more than 30 years, the French society was torn by violence between Catholics and Protestants. They are known as Huguenots. The Protestant members, the minority of groups, are Huguenots. And the culmination of that is going to be in the conflict known as the 30 Years' War, a Catholic Protestant struggle that really begins within the Holy Roman Empire and pushes its way out from there. Eventually, scholars estimate between 15 and 30% of the German population will perish from things like violence, famine, or disease. It's not until the Peace of Westphalia that happens in 1648 brings the conflict to an end, with the reshuffling of some boundaries that will take place during this time. There was an agreement that each state was sovereign or basically on its own to kind of choose what religious affairs within their own territory. So within Germany, many princes kind of spread out and ruled those areas. And so they were able to decide what religion would be their own religion at that point in time. So wars that happen and really change kind of the way that we look at certain aspects of that title. So that's what we're looking at there with Europe's fractured political system. The breakaway of the Protestant Reformation, as well as kind of tendencies within the Catholic Church itself, provoked something known as the Catholic Reformation, or what's called the Counter-Reformation. Really, it is going back and looking at the ideas of what they had. During the Council of Trent that takes place from 1545 to 1563, Catholics are going to clarify and reaffirm their unique doctrines, their sacraments, and their practices, such as the authority of the Pope, priestly celibacy. So as we know, there are issues within this that we talk about that says, hey, within Catholicism, priests are celibate. In Protestantism, that's not necessarily the case. They aren't necessarily celibate. They can be married and have their own families within that. But Catholicism really works on celibacy and says this is a part of it. The veneration of saints, the idea that saints are a huge part of the Catholic Church, and the importance of the church tradition and things like good works is a big part of this as well. We look at in our own Catholic society, our good works come from our things like community service hours and us using those ideals within this to be a part of it. So the Catholic Counter-Reformation is really going to be provoked by the surge of Protestantism, but it really doesn't change the Catholic Church. It just reinvigorates them to look at some of the ideals that they do have. During this time, we'll also see things like the Society of Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, that comes about, which was a priestly order that looks at the new kind of ways in which they will divvy up some of these ideals. They also crack down on dissidents as well. Even though the Reformation is profoundly religious, it encouraged a very skeptical attitude toward authority and tradition. That goes all throughout, not just within the church. It successfully challenges a power that was known as the Catholic Church. It establishes power against the Pope. It allows people to stand up against the Pope and against the church itself. In the centuries that follows, it turns some skepticism and habit of this idea that thinking independently against all conventional ideas and religion as well. So it opens up a space for new direction in European intellectual life during this time period. Okay, this portrait here is an engraving of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church in 1517 that would launch the Protestant Reformation. There are many depictions of this, but this just happens to be one of them. Okay, this map here is going to show the rise of Protestantism as a set of religions, both within the states itself, so that you can see kind of the boundary of the Holy Roman Empire there, which is in red, and that shows kind of the where everything is breaking apart. The obviously Catholicism in Spain, France, England, or Ireland as well, but where you start to see more Protestant dominant and prominent Protestant influence, you can see how this kind of drags itself and pushes itself outward. This portion here is going to show kind of a map of kind of areas of new Christian presence by 1700 and areas of Christianity in 1500 as well. So this map also shows kind of that ideals there. And you can see the different places that have kind of the ideas behind it. There's Catholic, there's Russian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox. You can see the differences that have the presence within this Westernized religion. So Christianity has motivated European political and economic expansion, benefits from it. The resolutely Catholic Spanish and Portuguese both view the movement overseas as a continuation of crusading tradition. It is going to complete the liberation of their countries from Muslim control and push itself into a new ideal. Imperialism and globalization of Christianity. So first we need to understand what is imperialism. The extending of a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force is really what imperialism is discussed by. So if religion drove and justified Europeans venturing abroad, it is also a difficult thing to imagine the globalization of Christianity without kind of the support of colonial settlers and traders, of course, within that. New England Puritans, for example, planted a distinctive Protestant version of Christianity in North America. They planted a distinctive Protestant version of Christianity all throughout. And there's an emphasis there on education, moral purity, the idea behind personal conversion, civic responsibility as well. And they do not show much interest in converting Native people, but rather seek to push them out, as opposed to really giving them the opportunity to change with this role within North America. Within Spain, there is a greater emphasis on the pushing of Christianity, and in this case Catholicism, on to the distinctive people and distinctive groups there, with things like the missions that had set up with great success within that area. Most important was the overwhelming European presence that it was experienced as a military conquest during this time. There's forced labor, social disruption, disease, but surely it must have seemed as if the old gods had been bested and that future power lay within European regions in those areas. So throughout the modern era, people solidly rooted in Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, so on and so forth, are far more resistant to the Christian message than those who practiced a more localized, small-scale religion. So for instance, like in the Americas, it might have been changing in those areas. So Spanish America and China illustrate very different ideas between those societies. Christianity becomes widely practiced within places like the Americas, and less likely within places like China. So there is this idea behind a conversion or adaptation throughout Spanish America itself. With this, you have some factors in reception. So the process of population collapse, conquest and resettlement of Native Americans make them more receptive to the conquering religion there, in this case being Christianity. All those things create a setting in which the victors hold the ability to kind of push this on them within Spanish America. Europeans are going to see that their political and military success as a demonstration of power of the Christian God. And Native American peoples generally agreed. So by 1700, or really earlier than that at times, a vast majority will be baptized and see themselves in some aspects as Christians. Um, the Aztecs and Incas had always imposed their gods in some fashion on defeated people. So it made sense that both practically and spiritually to kind of affiliate with the European gods, saints, rites, and rituals. And so many millions of those accept the baptism and contribute to the construction of village churches, so on and so forth. So it's pushed onto these groups of people. And we see that there are adaptations to that as well when we look at it. The earlier conquerors make really no attempts to eradicate local deities and religious practices. They use inclusiveness of Mesoamerican and Andean religions that had made it possible for their subjects to accommodate their gods and their rulers as well. So, operating with a Spanish colonial regime that actively encouraged conversion, you often see persuasion and patient teaching. Um, and so, these are some of the things that's a part of this. It's hardly going to be surprising, though, that any kind of aggression action generated resistance. So around 1600, the native Peruvian nobleman Guaman Poma de Ayala, commented on the posture of native women toward Christianity. So it says here, they do not confess, they do not attend catechism classes, nor do they go to mass. And resuming the ancient customs and idolatry, they do not want to serve God or crown occasionally overt resistance erupts. And so it changes these ideals. There is a more common frontal attack on Christianity. The colonial authorities will quickly smash that, though, with efforts of blending the two religious traditions together. And they'll interpret Christian practices within kind of an Andean framework that exists there. In Mexico as well, there's an immigrant Christianity was assimilated into patterns of local culture. Churches built on or near the sites of old temples become really the focus of community identity. Cofradias, church-based associations of lay people, organize community processions and things like festivals. They make provisions for proper funerals and burials for their members as well. And there's really a central to emerging Mexican Christianity within this time period. There really is no corresponding religious figures within the Catholic Church as far as women go. And we do kind of see the blending of these groups coming together, this self-bleeding or self-blending of things that come apart. So when we look at Christianity as a whole, there is this global adaptation to Christianity that does exist. In general, we have to look at Christianity as being a real globalizing factor within the world itself, not just within Europe where it first originated and mainly within Italy and the Pope. There is a move from this. Places like Britain do become important aspects to this, and they push groups out into the Americas, and they spread Christianity there. In Spain, we obviously have with the Spanish empires pushing into really the Americas and Mexico area, South America, and even the coast of California. We see the Spanish influence that happens here of Catholicism. Generally speaking, on the West Coast, you're going to see more Catholic people, even throughout history, even nowadays, than you would maybe on the East Coast, because religions aren't necessarily as familiar, and we don't see the patterns of people pushing themselves out. In reality, guys, when we look at this, for the most part, where you are born and raised is generally where you settle. It's a known thing. We understand that. So when you move to those areas, you generally keep your own traditions and your own beliefs. And so for people who have settled um, within the West Coast, they usually you see a lot of factors of Catholicism, and it not only does that, but it also brings immigrants to those areas as well. So even if you're coming over to the United States early on as a group, you generally are going to push yourself into areas that you understand. So that's the reason why the Salinas Valley has a huge portion of not just Catholicism with the Hispanic um, roots that we have here, but you also see another important aspect of this within like uh, people of Swiss descent who are here. There is a large number of Swiss descent people who are of Swiss descent here because of the fact that Catholicism was a big part of that in Switzerland and pushes here. So there are those changes with that too, and so migration becomes a big part of the globalization of Christianity as well, and opening new opportunities for people to travel and move into different areas.